Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. This is the fifth in a series, Gary. That doesn't say anything about the importance of you or Davis, but the fifth in a series of the President's Leadership Conversations. These are designed first and foremost so that the people at the office of the president have a chance to meet, to get to know the leadership on our campuses, and know a little bit about the people who are leading them, but also about what the priorities are of the campus, because these are people who come to work, as you know, all the time in Oakland to support the University of California where it happens. And that's mainly at 10 locations around the state, and many of them don't get the opportunity to be at the Davis campus. So it's a great opportunity for them to hear from you and to hear about the work that they support all the time. So delighted to have the opportunity to do this. Gary May is the seventh chancellor of UC Davis. He is an accomplished engineer. He served as the dean of Georgia Tech's College of Engineering, one of the best and most innovative colleges of engineering in the country before joining UC. He's known for his leadership in higher education nationally and in the state of California and his partnerships with civic and business leaders. In 2015, President Barack Obama honored him with the Presidential Award for Excellence in STEM Mentoring, one of many accolades over his distinguished career. And a little later today, I'm going to ask you about mentoring in particular, because I know people will have an interest in this. So, Chancellor May, thanks for joining us today.
President Milliken, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, whether I'm first, fifth, or 10th.
Now, first thing, everybody, you already know this because of my introduction, but Gary's an engineer, and engineers are problem solvers, data driven, and they all of them that I've ever worked with tend to move quickly and maybe don't spend as much time talking as some of our colleagues on the Council of Chancellors do. Last summer, I did when I was starting, I did one-on-ones with each of the chancellors, and I can tell you, Gary, that by far yours was the shortest because your answers were very, very brief. So today you need to extend those just a little bit so people can get to know you better. A lot of transformations at UC Davis over the last 10 years. We're gonna talk about that. But the first thing I want to do is just about you, and I hope that you will tell us a little bit about where you grew up, your upbringing, school, and kind of your career trajectory.
I'm originally from St. Louis. That's where I grew up and went to high school, and was introduced to the possible career of engineering through a really great summer program that was sponsored by local industry. It was McDonnell Douglas Corporation that now is Boeing, but they had a summer program for students with science and math aptitude called Develop Engineering Students, and it was specifically targeted at students who had exhibited some aptitude and were nominated by their high school. So that actually worked. I became an engineering student. I went to Georgia Tech as an undergraduate, studied electrical engineering, and finished up there, and then went to UC Berkeley for my PhD. So I had UC experience before coming back to UC Davis. After I finished my PhD, I went back to Georgia Tech, joined the faculty, was there for 26 years for most of my career, a variety of roles, rose through the faculty ranks, and in leadership was a department head and something called executive assistant to the president, and eventually dean of engineering, as you mentioned, before coming to UC Davis in 2017.
And back then, executive assistant to the president sort of meant chief of staff, as we would think of today. But
right.
For a variety of reasons, I think that was too militaristic for higher education to use back then. I also had that role at one point in my career.
So I didn't know that.
So here's the interesting thing. You've only worked where you went to school. So
If
that
you,
means you're not going anywhere else because you haven't gone to school anywhere else.
yeah, that's true. Only at the UC and Georgia Tech.
So, is there any conflict if UC plays, if UC Berkeley plays Davis in sports?
That happens often. We've played football and basketball. We haven't had any luck in football since I've been here, but we did beat UC Berkeley in basketball a few years ago.
Are your loyalties divided?
I'm loyal to who pays my check. So,
That's what I've always told my children when I've moved around the country, and they remain Tar Heel basketball fans. But I said, yeah, they're not paying me anything.
that's
So,
right.
good. So, growing up, you have talked about, and I've heard you speak about your parents' influence on your education, and so what's that about? Tell me a little bit about that. What?
Well, like many people, my parents were my first role models and mentors, and really, set the foundation for what I would later uh, become. My mother was an educator. She was a public school teacher for about 40 years in St. Louis public schools. Um, she actually was the among the class that integrated the University of Missouri back in the 50s. So that was a real point of pride for us. She showed remarkable determination in facing adversity in those times and getting her degree in education and going on to be a teacher. My dad was not formally educated initially. He got his degree later in life. He was a postal worker, but he was very intent on my sister and I doing well in school. He would give me $1 for every A I got on my report card. And dollars bought a lot of comic books back then, so I was motivated. And then he would take my report cards to work with him and show them off to his coworkers, which I'm sure made him really popular.
That's great. Uh, so I remember, maybe you remember better than I do. I'm trying to think of her name. Famous broadcaster personality from like NPR, who also was part of that integrating class at Missouri. Um,
Oh, yes, I can't think of her name now that
I
you've.
can see her, but I can't
Yeah,
think of the name. But yeah,
yeah,
Charlene. Well, somebody will think of it and then they'll mention it in
right.
the chat. So now, has it been 10 years at Davis?
This is my ninth year.
Your ninth year. Okay. So tell us a little bit about the difference today between the Davis you came to and the Davis that you're overseeing now.
Yeah, when I came to Davis, one of the things I, perceived was it was like I would call a sleeping giant, all this excellence, but not a lot of people knew about it. And I think some of that was intentional. I used to say that people here were pathologically humble. They would really not be willing to, promote themselves or talk about the great things that were happening here. And kind of in the shadow of some of our sister campuses, to be honest. So that I set out to change that immediately. I'll give you a few examples of how we've made some progress. One student example, a research example, and a philanthropy example. This year we were ranked as the #2 public university in the United States by the Wall Street Journal, which that ranking talks about how you prepare your graduates for success, and how you transform the lives of your students. And we're proud of that one because that's really what the game is all about. And it's also the highest national ranking we've ever achieved in any of those polls. Uh, and while that is happening, our last two undergraduate classes have had more students from historically underrepresented backgrounds than in the last 25 years. 40% of our students are first generation. And at the same time, the average high school GPA of those students is 4.03. So there's excellence and diversity. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. They happened at the same time for us. We've increased graduation rates from those historically underrepresented groups by 20% in the last decade. So that's the student piece. At the same time, research wise, for the past 5 years, we've averaged $1 billion in external research funding. A very small number of public universities have that record. It's in some jeopardy now with what's happening nationally, but we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. And then in philanthropy, we've had several major gifts this year that you're aware of. including a $120 million gift from Sandy and Joan Weil to name our School of Veterinary Medicine. That's the largest philanthropic gift in the history of that profession of veterinary medicine. And overall, this year we've got 2 weeks to go in the fiscal year, but we've raised $650 million at UC Davis, which is more than twice the previous record that we held. So, we're having some success in many different areas, and I think raising the profile and waking up that sleeping giant.
Yeah. Well, your success in diversifying the student body and in the success that they've had is a remarkable story for Davis. So one person asked me, so I'm going to intersperse some questions I got from the audience in here. And here's a really particularly important one now after you talked about the gift to veterinary medicine. They want to know whether you're a dog or a cat person.
I'm definitely a dog person. I had a dog growing up, and cats and I don't normally see eye to eye.
Let's do shift to research. Tell us, are you seeing any impact from the kinds of things that the administration is doing now with funding in general, or you haven't experienced the same kind of thing that UCLA experienced where they had a block of funding frozen? But what's the experience at UC Davis with this?
No, we haven't had the same level of challenge that some of our other campuses have had, but we have had various grants canceled, and we've had to, appeal those decisions. We had some success in some of the appeals. Probably the biggest negative was the USAID demise. That was for us. We had about almost $100 million worth of awards in the pipeline from USAID that went away, and a lot of that was, agricultural initiatives around the world, some public health initiatives as well that are really going to hurt people. And we're not only sad about losing that support, but we're sad about not having the impact that we hope to have with that research in various places around the world.
That research, I mean, Davis is well known as one of the most important land grant universities in the country. The College of Agriculture, your veterinary medicine are always at the top. What's that research portfolio look like? I mean, where is it? How much is sort of engineering or physical sciences or agriculture?
Yeah, of the billion, it breaks down like this: about 400 million, 450 million of that is through the School of Medicine, medical research. About 250 to 300 of that is agricultural research, and then the rest is sort of split among engineering, veterinary medicine, some of the other disciplines, but almost half of it is medicine.
I want to come back now to the mentorship issue because you've talked about it, and frankly, you have a reputation for encouraging mentorship at the campus. So, what would you tell people about A, the importance of having them, but also B, what the university could or should be doing in terms of making sure that both staff and students have the kind of mentoring that you and I have both enjoyed?
I think if you talk to any successful person in higher ed or any other field and ask them how they became successful, almost all of them will mention mentoring as part of that equation. In my 30-year career now as a professor and administrator, I've personally mentored more than 100 students, graduate students and undergraduate students, many of whom have gone on to become mentors and leaders in academia and industry themselves. I think part of that was motivated by my own experience as, needing that mentoring. When I got my PhD at Berkeley in '91, there was about 30 of us African-American engineers who got PhDs in the United States that year. So that gives you some idea of how abysmally underrepresented we were and are. And, throughout that experience, I became very interested in helping others achieve what I had achieved, and also learning from people who had achieved before me. One of my greatest mentors was a gentleman by Augustine Esavoy, who was at that time, when I was an undergrad at Georgia Tech, he was the first and only Black professor in the College of Engineering. And so, he became a father figure to me, took me under his wing. We're still very close. We started a scholarship here at UC Davis a couple of years ago together. He is one of the people that really instilled in me the importance of being a mentor. And I try to do that myself. We have mentoring programs here now at Davis. One is called Envision UC Davis, where we bring talented undergraduates and master students to the campus to try to get them to think about graduate school here and PhD programs. We have a local one, job shadow program that I have students come. They can follow around any campus leader for a day and kind of learn what our lives are like. And they learn from me when they follow me around. They don't learn it's mostly meetings and it's not that exciting, but but at the same time, it gives them some exposure and demystifies what's happening here at the leadership level at the university. So.
Yeah, I'd be very nervous. You're a brave man. I'd be nervous about having people follow me around. One of
Yeah.
the things that people always ask me, and I know they ask you too, and so I'll ask you now on behalf of everyone here is people want to have a sense of how a chancellor spends his or her days, and what I remember once I was asked at a gathering how much time I spent fundraising, and I gave an answer, and my wife burst out laughing and said, "No, it's like twice that." But tell us a little bit about, give us your calendar audit.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about fundraising first. If we're in a campaign, that's at least 40 or 50% of my time, and that includes traveling to visit potential donors and having events and those sorts of things. Um, if I'm on the campus, as the students who shadow me learn, it's a day full of meetings primarily. We sprinkled in some speaking at various events and some meeting with dignitaries that may visit the campus and those sorts of things. But it's a lot of discussions and meetings with the campus leadership. And then the day doesn't end there, as you know. After the work day ends, you go home to an inbox full of email and memos to write and letters to write and all those sorts of things. So, the day really doesn't end till, well into the evening, 10, 11 o'clock at night, and you get up and do it all over again. But I try to start each day with some exercise. I know that you do that as well. So I go to the gym on campus and I lift weights around 5:30 or 6 a.m. Or I run. I have a little path that I run around campus. It's about three or 4 miles. I'll do one of those two things every day if I'm in town.
So you're early enough that you beat most of the undergraduates to the gym.
That's right. I try not to be a spectacle where they can laugh at me and choose not to spot me and things like that. So
Behind me, you already identified before we went live is a scene from UC Davis. It's a beautiful campus, but maybe tell people a little bit about it and what's special
yeah.
about the campus.
Well, it's the largest campus geographically in the system. It's 5,300 acres, and to give you some idea, that's like 6 UC Berkeleys. So, not that I'm competitive, but and you can understand why. A lot of our land is experimental agricultural land, so that makes sense. And we also have one of the most comprehensive campuses in the system, with more than 100 undergraduate programs and I think 90 plus graduate professional programs, spread across almost 1,200 buildings of various types. Now, some of those are just like storage units, and some of those are big academic buildings. And we have our main campus is here in Davis, but also our campus in Sacramento, where medical school and nursing school and our hospital are. And then we have some outposts for research in Bodega Bay and Lake Tahoe. So we have a pretty diverse set of facilities that make up UC Davis.
Those are not bad places for having an outpost, so you may have to go visit them occasionally.
We do make it a point to visit those two places and have meetings there when we have retreats and board meetings and things like that.
So some of the folks listening will have spent most of their lives and maybe their academic career and their work in urban areas in California. So one of the things that I'm intrigued by is Davis's its cooperative extension program, its land grant status. I mean, I know UC is unique kind of in having a land grant status designation for the entire university, but Davis is obviously the the real point of, I mean, in the lead there for the university. So, talk a little bit about the work that is done in that domain.
Yeah, we feel it's part of our mission and our responsibility to sort of uh, be the focal point of the service orientation associated with being a land grant, and that means by providing our expertise to farmers, and that means helping our research get from the laboratory to the marketplace efficiently and effectively. That means having a good return on investment. We're responsible for about $13 billion of economic activity in the state every year. And we're trying to build upon that. We may talk about Aggie Square a bit in the conversation, but that's one of those efforts to do even more with economic development and fulfilling that land grant mission and returning the state's investment.
So one of the things that I am personally most interested in is your work in wine and vinoculture
Yeah.
and the I mean Davis is clearly I would say the best in the world, but certainly the best in the United States in this space. And so much of the wine industry, people have come from UC Davis. How did that happen? And what's the extent of it today?
So we are number one in viticulture and enology in the world. Only people from France argue with that, but we think we're number one. And it's been sort of a 40 or 50-year journey. I guess the critical point in that journey was the famous wine tasting event that occurred in Napa Valley with Napa wines versus some of the French wines. And a key figure in that was Robert Mondavi, who our institute is named after. Our Food and Wine Institute is named after Mr. Mondavi. And so that was sort of the catalyst to get UC Davis as the focal point for that industry. We already were well known for the agriculture, so the viticulture is the growing of the grapes. So we already were well known there, but we had growing emphasis and expertise on the enology part, the winemaking. And it's not it's much science as it is art. Our viticulture and enology program has been led by chemical engineers since I've been here. So it's a very, very rigorous activity, and it also is very useful for us with donors and events and those sort of things. There's several hundred wineries in Napa and Sonoma. Almost everyone has the UC Davis connection. The winemaker, the CEO, the head of sales, somebody has some background at UC Davis. So we're really proud of that, and it's really something that helps us to get our brand and our name out there.
You've got your own label now, don't you?
We do. We do sell wines. We have a small winery in Napa, and we make Cabernet Sauvignon, and we make some Sauvignon Blanc as well.
So if people wanted to buy this, would they be supporting UC Davis if they?
Yeah, yes, and the UC system, and I'm gonna if you force me, I'll put a link in the chat that tells about it. I don't know if that's legal.
Well, I've tasted the Cabernet, and I think it's good. Let's go back to something you mentioned, and I had the chance to visit Aggie Square. It's pretty impressive. How did that come about? What's the strategy behind it?
Yeah, so the real origin is from my time at Georgia Tech. I was really involved in developing an initiative called their Tech Square, Technology Square, which was an attempt to link the university research with the city and the business community, and bring that research, those discoveries, to the commercial market more effectively and efficiently. I saw the same potential here at UC Davis as at Georgia Tech. And so, I was I was not risk averse. So in my very first speech, when I was inaugurated, I talked about this Aggie Square idea and doing it in Sacramento, close to the Capitol, taking advantage of our presence there in health and the land that we own to build a set of facilities where we can not only do research and teach, but we can invite industry partners to co-locate with us, We have an incubator, an accelerator to have our own startups have an opportunity to be successful. And uh, so we were able to find a developer to partner with us. The city of Sacramento was a key partner very early on. The former mayor Darrell Steinberg is an alum of UC Davis, and he was quite a strong partner. And the current mayor Kevin McCarty was able to give us some seed funding when he was in the assembly, and has also been a strong partner. At any rate, we opened the facility last May. It's about a little over 1 million square feet of space, 5 buildings, about $1 billion of development, a couple of research buildings, some housing, what we call a lifelong learning building, and we've already been successful in attracting 11, I think is the number of startups to join with us. They've signed leases. We've got a few larger companies that are in the queue that I wish I could announce today, but I hopefully we'll be announcing them in the next several months. You know about one of them directly. So we're really excited about what can happen at Aggie Square and how we can continue to build on our economic development mission. We expect to add jobs, maybe 5,000 or so jobs to the region, and another, $500 million worth of economic activity annually.
So what's something that no one would know about UC Davis? Is there a best kept secret? Is there something that even people who are familiar with the campus might not know about?
Well, one of the things I kind of alluded to earlier was that the comprehensive nature of the place. We have hundreds of undergraduate programs and almost 100 graduate programs, but the level of excellence and quality is what another thing that really surprised me. I knew about agriculture, I knew about veterinary medicine, knew about winemaking, but I think the level of quality for, say, our law program and our business program and our engineering program and many others, psychology. So the level of quality that's sort of across the board in the comprehensive nature of the university was something that really pleasantly surprised me when I got here, and we're trying to really make more of that and promote that.
So I asked earlier about the impact of the administration's actions with research, and everybody's aware of that, and they're aware of uh, other areas of the agenda in Washington. People are aware at OP about the budget constraints that all of our institutions face. So somebody has just asked, and I'm going to give you a chance because I'm interested in hearing about it. What are you positive about? What's the bright spot for you in your work today?
Yeah, I mentioned some of them. I think, we have a lot of momentum here at UC Davis. Fundraising is a big part of that. We're not even in a campaign year, and we've set a record in fundraising, and we've identified, as we started contemplating our next campaign, we've identified, thousands of potential prospects that we haven't even talked to, and we think we can do a lot with that in order to provide the resources that will need to sort of stem that tide while we experience this rough point in federal funding. It won't make up for it completely, but it certainly will help. I think we have momentum in our uh, student success. I mentioned our improvements in retention and graduation rates, our diversity, our trying to address student basic needs. I think we've been having really good success there and been one of the leaders in the nation in that. We've had a really good town-gown relationship with the city of Davis that wasn't that great when I got here, but we think it's really on firm footing now. Really exceptional partnerships, especially during the pandemic, where the city and the university partnered to keep the place safe and to help people get through that really difficult period. So a lot of positive things you can talk about here at UC Davis, and if you subtract out some of the external federal challenges, I think the future is really, really, really bright.
So just to shift, take it up a few thousand feet in national higher education issues, I'm interested in we've been hearing for the last couple of years about decline in confidence in higher education nationally. And I personally, am concerned with that because of what that can do to enrollments, to support from policymakers that reflect the views of their constituents. I'm interested in if you think that's accurate, that there is a decline, and what you would attribute that to. And maybe a third part of this is, what can we do about it if you think it's an issue?
Yeah, I do think it's an issue we have to take seriously. There's always a kernel of truth in many of these perceptions. So we do have to not dismiss it, and we have to think about where it's coming from. And I think we can do a better job at being transparent and being accessible and being affordable. And some of those criticisms, are have some validity to them. So that means we have to take a reflective look at ourselves and see how we can improve. But I also think that higher ed is still the best deal in town. We transform lives. A student who graduates with a 4-year degree will earn $1 million more in lifetime income over someone who does not. And that's generational wealth for some of the students that we educate here at UC Davis, many of whom are the first in their families to graduate from college. We have been trying to take these messages to our constituents, writing op-eds in regional newspapers and some national outlets about some of the impact of not only our educational mission, but some of the work, our research, the impact of our research in wildfire mitigation, veterinary medicine, healthcare, some really good stories that we can tell. Federal grants have funded 99% of FDA approved drugs in the last decade or so. So we have to we have to take those criticisms seriously, but at the same time continuing to tell people how positive an impact higher education has, both for the people that experience it, but for the broader community and society.
Now, I'm told, I don't have any evidence of this because it's my own failing, but I'm told you're one of the most active of our chancellors on social media. Speaking of getting our message out, what's that about? Are you just glued to TikTok or?
Well, my social media career started when I started seeing my kids. I have 2 daughters, and they were becoming active on whatever it was back in the day, Facebook probably, or MySpace or something. And I was really curious about what they were doing and saying in this media. So I got on Facebook, I guess it was, to monitor their behavior. They promptly then changed their identities and then, fooled me, and I didn't know what they were doing. But I kind of got hooked after I got on the first time and sort of saw the value of social media as a way to get a message out and as a way to stay connected to people. It has a lot of bad aspects as well. I try to stay away from those. But so when I got here as a new leader, I thought, this would be a good way for people to see me as a human and not just as a figurehead. So I'm very active on all the various channels of social media. And I think our communications team here spends a lot of time thinking of sometimes undignified things for me to do to
I
humanize
would
me.
ask you about the most undignified, but we'll let people find it on their own.
I've driven tractors and rode horses and done all sort of crazy things.
When I was president of Nebraska about 20 years ago, I was in a cow milking competition at the state fair with the governor. So I don't think you can beat me on the humiliating social.
Haven't done that one yet, but I have been in a dunk contest in a dunk tank.
So back on the major kind of trends and impacts. You cannot have a conversation about higher education today or read the newspaper without hearing about how AI is going to either eliminate higher education or make possible great new strides or result in all of us losing our jobs. I'm really glad to have the chance to talk to an engineer about what you think in both short-term and long-term impacts of AI will be. maybe on society at large, but in particular on UC Davis.
As an engineer, I'm fairly bullish about AI, enthusiastic about what it can do for us. I know that there are some concerns. I'm not on the alarmist side of that argument. We do have to put some controls in place to properly manage the impact. But there's so much that AI will do to make our lives easier and ease burdens, make us more efficient. I'm on the side of, I think Sam Altman said this from OpenAI, that in terms of jobs, we don't see AI as replacing people, but people who know how to use AI as replacing people who don't. And that's kind of where I land as well. We do have to worry about some of the environmental and sustainability concerns there. We have a lot of research in that area here at Davis. Actually, we have a modular approach to data centers to being developed by one of our engineering faculty that I think can really address some of the sustainability concerns and the energy use. But overall, what's new about AI is really the large language models. The rest of it is not that new. The first AI textbook was written in the 70s. We were talking about expert systems, and I myself have used neural networks in my research since the 90s. So maybe that is biasing my point of view, but I just see a lot of potential for making people's lives easier and better and more healthy and those sorts of things with AI.
That's positive. Do you use an agent now?
I occasionally will do a first draft of a letter with Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever, and I've done similar things with PowerPoint presentations with some of the tools that are available to do that. So yeah, I think it makes most of those tools give you a really good first draft and help you to jumpstart whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish.
So I've been in university system offices for 38 years.
Hmm.
And in 5 different places. And one thing that is a constant is, I say this in the nicest way possible, there's a little bit of sibling tension between a system office and a campus, always. And
Yeah.
so while you have this opportunity, is there something that you would like us, the folks who are listening and who are part of the Office of the President, to know about either Davis or campus in general?
First, I'll just say that our relationship with the system office has been great, and I'm not just saying that because you're my boss. I mean, it's been great for the 3 presidents that I've worked for, and I think if I had to pick something, I would suggest as a recommendation to the folks there in Oakland is, to the extent that you can, try to find some time to spend on a campus, whether that's through, maybe we could set up an exchange program or something like that. But I think the folks there, like yourself, who've been on a campus, have a much better perspective of what that is like than those that have spent their entire career in an office, because it's very different. I remember, so I won't name the person, but I remember someone from UCOP being here on the day that we had a particular campus protest, and sort of the eyes widening and the shock and the fear when they had to face that. And that's kind of that doesn't happen every day, but it does happen, and that's something that people that are on the campuses have to learn to deal with, and you don't necessarily have as much of that in the system office.
I may be in the slow group, but I recognize the advantages of being in a system office, and avoiding that work on the ground may be one of them. Now I'm going to intersperse a couple personal things that have come in here. You are reportedly a fan of Star Trek. So
I am.
why?
Well, science fiction has always been attractive to me. I grew up watching Star Trek, the original series. Had a crush on Lieutenant Uhura. That's one big reason. Uh, but just the technology, the stories, the writing was really good. The special effects were horrible, but the writing was pretty good. The acting was marginal. But think about that original crew at that time in our history. There's people from every background having leadership roles, working together to solve a problem, even an alien on the bridge. And I just got hooked, and I've watched not just the original series, but all the ones that came after that. And I've also kind of modeled my leadership style after Kirk in some ways, where, the kind of real caring about your team, and getting input from everybody before you make a decision. All those sorts of things have influenced me, and I got that from Kirk.
Wow. Oh, that's great. That's much better than I thought it was going to be. So you've seen all of them.
Just about the more recent ones that are on streaming services. I haven't gotten caught up on all of those yet, but
Yeah.
yeah.
You mentioned early on the dollar that you got for A's that you used on comic books.
Uh-huh.
Was that was a passion?
Yeah, I started reading comic books when I used to go to the barbershop with my dad when I was a kid, and we'd be waiting for his turn. I'd wait for him to finish, and the barber had comic books and magazines in the shop, and I basically taught myself how to read by looking at those pictures and looking at the words, and again became hooked. And I still actually read comic books today. I go every Wednesday. Today's Wednesday. You go to this, you can get the latest batch from your favorite outlet, and I have about 15,000 in my collection. It's it by now it's worth some money, so that's another nice thing about the
Ah,
collection. Yeah. Um,
wow, that's amazing. So when you're not at work, we heard that you lift weights and you run,
mhm.
and you answer email. That's not quite as exciting. What else do you like to do? Or vacation, any of that stuff?
Yeah, well, anything I can do with my wife and my family is a priority.
Wait a minute, can you keep up with your wife running?
No, that not at
I
all. My
didn't think
wife
so.
has run a marathon or two, and my limit is about 5 miles. So, and then we can't run together either because she likes to talk to me when we run, and I don't. I'm just trying to get it over with.
I'm exactly the same way.
So,
Uh, my wife wants to talk. I said, no, I can't.
but we like to travel. We go on family vacations every year with our daughters, and now one is married, so one my son-in-law, and we have a set of friends that we've been traveling with for 20 years. And any spare moment I can spend with my wife or my daughters is like gold for me, and that's how I try to spend the time that I don't have to spend working.
So it is rumored that the food is better at the Davis dining halls than any place else. Is that because of agriculture? How did he do that?
I don't know, but I think it's true. It's really good. We have various types of cuisine. We have an international dining commons. We have one that's more American, traditional American food. But so the couple things. What my wife and I will go eat with the students from time to time, and we only do that because the food is decent, and we like to sit with the students and make them feel awkward when we're sitting with them. but but we also in our social media, one of the things we do, we have a weekly program we call Thursday Thoughts, and in Thursday Thoughts, once every couple months, we'll do something called Lachelle's Foodie Finds. Lachelle's my wife, as you know, and we'll go to a dining commons, and they'll bring out some of their best stuff for us to taste and comment on for the audience. And I'm just shocked by how good it is. It's just,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
uh, if you went to school when we went to school, it's nothing like it's night and day. We used to eat
right.
stuff I couldn't really tell what it was. It was just kind of a gray or brown mass of things, and it didn't taste good.
Yeah, yeah. No, I certainly get that. So I've also heard, and this speaks very highly of you. I've heard that you are uh, really engaged with the staff at Davis, in
Yeah.
addition to the administration and the faculty. Um, how do you think about involving the staff in decisions and in the work that you do?
The university is sort of a three-legged stool: the faculty, staff, and students, and the staff is an important part of that. I meet with the staff assembly leadership once a month. I try to attend various events. We have a Thank Goodness for Staff event on both our Davis and Sacramento campus once a year. And by the way, that's where I got put in the dunk tank more than once. I think it's
I hope
really
that was captured on social media.
that was, and there actually was a really long line of people that wanted to participate. I think it's important to stay connected to the staff and hear their concerns and have a communication vehicle for them, and let them know that they matter and they're valued. Uh, and so and that's paid off for me. I think when we have difficult times, I know who I can talk to and go um, to bounce ideas off of or to get some recommendations that will give me the staff perspective. And I think that has helped us with labor negotiations and all those kind of things that we have to worry about in leadership to have that connection to the staff.
Now, somebody has helpfully put in the chat, although it's not a question, that says, when I attended UC Davis, Chancellor James Meyer would regularly participate in the annual Picnic Day milking contest. So you may have to revive this tradition.
I do participate in a lot of picnic day activities. That's not one.
Uh, what's the best advice you've ever received?
Well, I think one that from one of the good family friends when I was a kid told me that the two things are really important for people, learning how to listen and learning how to wait. And that just says how important patience is, to being successful. Being a good listener is really important to leadership as well, and having some empathy for people. I'm not the kind of person that tries to be the loudest voice in the room. As you mentioned, I'm not very talkative. I try to be a good listener. I'm paying attention, but I'm not, you don't pay us by the word. So I don't feel like I have to say everything that is in my head. And I also would say, I try to learn something every day, try to help somebody, and just try to make things better every day. And reflect on that at the end of the day. What did I do today? What did I learn today? What did I do to improve somebody's life or make somebody's life better? And what did I do to make the university better?
This may be about half an AI question and half just a personal interest question, but if you were a 17 or 18-year-old now going to school, would you do the same thing, or do you think you'd study something else?
I think I would still be an engineer. I don't know if I would be an electrical engineer. I became really fascinated by biomedical engineering and those applications, but that didn't exist when I was an undergraduate. And I've tried to use some of the things I've learned from biomimicry and things like that in some of my work. But I think if I was going to school now, I'd probably choose biomedical engineering as opposed to electrical.
And would you do an academic track if you were going to do that?
Yeah, I think this is the right place for me. I really feel like I found my niche when I decided to take a job at a university versus industry. I had opportunities in both, but not many people get to really do what they were born to do, and I feel like this is it. I love being on a college campus. I love interacting with people and being able to sort of choose what I wanted to, as a professor, being able to choose what I wanted to study and what I wanted to teach. I don't have as many choices as a chancellor as I did as a professor because there are problems that have to be solved. But I still really get a charge out of the energy of a college campus and having an experience that can really transform people's lives.
So if you weren't in your current role, would it be in industry? What would you be doing if you weren't a chancellor?
Yeah, if I was still an engineer, I'd probably be in industry somewhere. I have a lot of good friends and people that do really interesting work that I have followed that I would be interested in doing. But if I was not an engineer at all, my grandfather owned a tavern, and um, I was too young to really to experience that. But he would let us sneak in every now and then and observe, and I just thought it was really cool that he would talk to people and try to help them with their problems and play music, and it was just a kind of a fun atmosphere. I don't know if I would have a bar or a tavern, but I'd like to do something like that if I was not in engineering.
A barber shop with comic books.
A barbershop. I don't need a barbershop much anymore, but I probably could be a decent barber.
All right. If you had a sentence or two, you're in a living room of a prospective student and their parents, why should it come to Davis?
So I would always say Davis is you can experience, we're the only college town in the UC system. And you can experience both that college town atmosphere and an urban atmosphere at the same university because we're in Davis and in Sacramento. And it's really a place where you can find yourself. We think we have a reputation of being a really collegial, friendly, helpful place, not so competitive that, people want to do well, but not so competitive that there's a lot of backbiting and ultra competitiveness. It's a safe place for students to study. It's a fun place. We have bicycles everywhere. We have everything you want to do, fraternities and sororities, student organizations, sports, all those things that you would get at any fulsome college experience, but also the high quality of the top 10 public university. So that's my pitch.
That's pretty good. Have you seen any good movies?
Wow, I haven't been able to go to movies in a while. What's the last movie I saw at a theater? Probably that last Avatar movie, uh, which tells you something about my taste. But I look forward to the Marvel movies every summer, though. So I'm looking forward to the next Spider-Man movie that's coming out this summer, and the Supergirl movie. And those not Marvel, but the superhero movies is my genre.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's great. Um, well, Gary, thank you. Thanks for being with us today. Appreciate it. And you did fill up the time, so
Oh,
thank you
good.
for that. I appreciate that. I appreciate everybody who was on today and submitted questions. I know because I talk to people, I'll bump into people in the hallway. I know today and tomorrow, and they'll say, "Oh my God, I really enjoyed Chancellor May, and I never would have known this." Of course, in your case, it'll be like about Star Trek and comic books that they would never have known.
Yeah.
But it does mean a lot to folks to get a chance to hear you and to learn about your own career trajectory and journey and your life journey. And so, great things going on at Davis. Appreciate everything you're doing, Gary, and I look forward to seeing the quad sometime in person.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity to talk about Davis, JB, and I appreciate your leadership, and thanks for having me.
You bet.
All
Thanks.
right.
See you.
Bye.